Captain Peter Kutsi, South Korea. This is my briefing room. All right, this is the follow-up on the last video where we demonstrated how to hold without a map. And now we are just going by the VOR outbound on the 280 radial, beginning the localizer approach to runway 08 left. So I've frozen the simulator and we'll go through the descent procedure. Descent procedure, remember, in my videos, we like to remember things by numbers, the 10 items, 3 groups of 3s, and then the 10th item happens to be the briefing. So the first group of 3 would be center tank fuel management and RNP, AMP, and the cabin altitude. So center tank fuel management, we have no fuel in the center tank. RNP, AMP, not a factor. As we are not in an RNAV environment, we're using raw data. And the landing altitude. Landing altitude is set 25 feet is Muscat, so 50 feet above. Remember, when returning to an airport, you don't have to set the altitude. If your departure airport will be your landing airport and you're within the restrictions as mentioned in the FCOM 2 with regard to distance, half the distance. So in any case, we're well within that. So the landing altitude has been set. The next set of 3 is to recall and then set VREF and set MDA. Let's do the recall first. So doing the recall, I have to find it in the software. Doing the recall, we actually make sure that all 12 lights are indicated and then release, and all the lights should go out. So we have no outstanding issues as far as after doing the recall. Next is to set the minimums, and we have, remember the minimums for the localizer approach for 530 off the chart. We add 50 feet, so 580 set. 580 set. The next is to set VREF. We're going to use flaps 30, so VREF 30, line selected, and we have it selected. Now that finishes that second group of 3. Now the next group of 3, we're looking at the frequencies. So the active frequency we want first is 114.5 on the number 1 VOR, 114.5 on the number 2 VOR. And in the standby mode window, 108.9, which is the localizer frequency for the localizer runway 08 left on number 1, and also standby on number 2. Courses for the first segment of the approach, the 280 radial set off the Muscat VOR, 280 radial set. Next is to do the operational performance tool performance calculations for landing distance. And we've done that, and we've come up with an auto brake setting of 2 agreed upon by both the captain and the first officer. Now that completes the 3 groups of 3. The last thing remaining is the briefing, and that will be done by the person who will be doing the flying. In this case, it would be the captain. So the captain would have given control to the first officer and also the radios. So you have control and you have the radios, and then the captain would actually give the briefing. Let's go ahead and do that briefing, because it's going to be quite different than normal briefings, especially if you have to end up going around. So This will be a localizer approach to runway 08 left at Muscat. The chart is 11-1, the date 6th of November 2020. And then you would wait for the pilot monitoring. In this case, the first officer would say, I confirm the date. And the frequency 108.9, and both pilots would ensure that the 108.9, in fact, was set in the standby mode for future selection. And both agree that the active mode is the VOR, 114.5. And 084, the course, will be the course after reaching the 12 nautical mile DME on the 280 radial of the Muscat VOR. And the final approach fix minimum is 2200. In any case, VOR at 6000, descending to 3400, and we'll be using a vertical speed mode for this. At 12 DME, I will deselect the VOR lock and turn left to intercept the inbound course of 084. When I deselect and start the turn, you will select the localizer frequencies. They're already in standby, and also reach up and select both courses to 084. I will fly the airplane and strictly fly the airplane on a heading that will take us to the intercept, at which time, as we come close to the intercept, descend to 2200 feet, and that will be the altitude for the final approach fix, which is the 6.7 DME IML, and the DME we want to make sure is working. So, and just before we get to that point, we will do a series of items. Normally, on a non-precision approach in an RNAV environment, you would do 7 items, and they are as follows. You'd set MDA, you'd make sure you're in VNAV path, and you would check the RMP, AMP, gear down, flaps 15, speed brakes armed, and open the speed window. We're going to modify those 7 items. We don't select VNAV, we don't have it. We're not in an RMP environment, so we don't have to talk about it, but we do want to set MDA before we get to the final approach fix. Gear down, flaps 15, speed brakes armed. All that should happen at approximately 2 nautical miles prior to the final fix. So at 8.7 DME IML, we'll start thinking about and getting that done. Then at the 6.7, we will start down using vertical speed. And if you notice, we are looking at the chart, and for the localizer descent angle of a 3.12 constant path ideally, and our VREF today was 137, we'll be flying at 142, and with the crosswind, very little headwind component, we're looking at a ground speed of close to, if we round it up to 150. So somewhere between 773 and 883 rated descent. So we're looking at close to 800 and we'll say 30 feet per minute. And that would be the briefing. So initially, perhaps 1,000 feet a minute to get established so that we have an average of 830 feet per minute. And we'll do that. And the minimum is 580 in the barometric altimeter. Call me. Approaching minimums, at which time I'll call continue or go around. In the event of a go around, I will call go around, depressing toga. We will make sure that the FMAs indicate go around in the auto throttle FMA window and toga in the vertical path window. The aircraft pitches up towards 15 degrees and go around thrust is set. Then I'll call flaps 15. On a positive rate on the barometric altimeter, first officer, you call positive rate. I will confirm a positive rate on the barometric altimeter and call gear up. Now, this part of the missed approach will be a third time that frequencies have to be changed and courses have to be changed. I, as a pilot flying, will fly the runway heading to 510 feet, then a left turn, maximum 210 knots to follow the 040 radial of the MCT VOR, climbing to 2800, then a left turn, maximum 220 knots to hold at 6,000 feet at the VOR. So I'm expecting you, first officer, once you've ensured that I've handled the aircraft properly and set it up properly, before I get to 510 feet, even at that point while I'm in the turn, set up the frequencies, reselect the VOR 114.5 on both, and reselect both courses to 040 on the MCP. I will turn to a heading that will give us an intercept before we get to 2800. I will use Vorlog and the autopilot. The autopilot I'll engage when I'm happy above 400 feet. Then we will track the 040 radial until 2800 feet, at which time I'll deselect Vorlog using heading and move the heading bug to the left and start a left turn and ensure my speed doesn't exceed 220 knots by opening the speed window, and the speed window should be open, and ensuring that we don't exceed 220 knots. And then we'll go to the VOR and hold, and the holding at the VOR will be as follows. Holding at the VOR is inbound course of 264 degrees and a right-hand pattern outbound. Now you know why we actually covered the holding in the previous video. So we know how to hold, and we have a 90-degree wind, so we know all about what we're going to do in the hold. So that is the briefing. Do you have any questions? No questions. And then we can go ahead and do the actual descent checklist. Now that the descent procedure was completed, then we'll do the approach procedure, which is basically altimeters and MDA checked. And we'll say that's complete, and the approach checklist has been complete. So we're ready to actually do the approach. So this briefing is different. So now we'll go and we'll fly the approach. In the next video, we'll actually fly the approach. So this terminates this video. See you in the next, where we will actually begin the flying of the localizer approach. Thank you for watching.